Hey guys, Steve here. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be kind of evaluating the torpedo systems of destroyers, kind of going over different criteria, looking at how they're actually applied in the game, and then we'll take a look at the Tier 7 ships and kind of compare some of these categories between those ships. So some of this is kind of more basic, but I'll elaborate on it, and some of it's a little bit more esoteric and not distinctly pointed out by the game. So I evaluate it by 6 different metrics. There's torpedo damage, torpedo range, effective range, torpedo speed, torpedo detection, and reaction time. Now, how one player may value each of these categories may differ from a different player, and it kind of breaks down to play style, how you're intending to use your destroyers. And this, by the way, these torpedo evaluations can be applied to cruisers or battleships, any ship that has a torpedo, but I'm primarily focused on the torpedoes on the destroyer platform, so that's why I've kind of done this analysis for my own self, and I figured most destroyer players would be interested in this information. So starting off with an easy one, torpedo damage. There's different factors that go into it. You got your basic raw damage, okay? So like for the Kagero upgraded, it's 21,596 versus a Fletcher 16,633. Pretty obvious there. Where you hit on the ship affects the actual damage in terms of if you're hitting it in the bow or stern or on the sides. The target's torpedo, belt, armor, stuff like that. There's splash damage, direct damage. Way more complicated, but just for evaluating the torpedo's values, I think just looking at the raw numbers is the easiest, and it kind of avoids getting too complicated. Torpedo range, again, another basic one. Like Kagero Lightning, 10 kilometers. That's how far from the ship those torps can travel before they fizzle out. So, in general, the longer the range, kind of the more valuable that number. Next category I evaluate is something I call effective range. It's not listed in the game, but it's basically the range of the torpedoes minus the surface detectability of the ship launching them. So the Kagero, for instance, you have 10 kilometer torps, detectability, surface detectability of 6 kilometers. That gives you a 4 kilometer effective range, and that's basically how much of a margin you have to launch your torps from a stealth position. So the higher the number of this effective range, the better it is for stealth torping. Torp speed as a raw number is pretty interesting. It primarily affects 2 things. Number one, how easy is it to dodge the torps, because the faster they're going, the harder it is to react to them. But I have a better metric to measure how hard torpedoes are to dodge coming up. The other thing that speed really affects is how easy it is to hit longer range targets, because the faster the torps get to your target, the less time they have to decide in their mind that they want to change course or make some sort of maneuver that's going to alter them from the path that you predicted they're going to be on and where you launch the torps in anticipation of them getting there. So torp speed for me is primarily a benefit for longer range torp play, but it does kind of creep into difficulty of, or effectiveness of the torps in action due to the difficulty of them being dodged. But we'll talk about that more a little bit here in a sec. Torp detection factors into that torp speed. Torp detection is basically how far away from the target ship do the torps have to be before they pop up on the screen, before that beeping noise starts going off. Sometimes the game says torpedoes detected or whatever it says. But, so, the shorter the detection range from the destroyer standpoint, the better the torps are. So, you have torp speed, torp detection. Both of them are valuable on their own. But then if you combine them into this last category, which I'm calling reaction time, that's where the evaluation of those 2 numbers really kind of tightens up, I'd say. So this reaction time formula is something that the PC players developed after some trial and error. You basically take the torpedo detection in meters, divide that number by the torpedo speed times 2.6. So, for instance, with the Fletcher, you would take 1,000 because the torpedo detection is 1 kilometer. So again, we're taking the meters, 1,000 meters, and we're dividing that times we're dividing that by 143, which is the torpedo speed of 55 times 2.6, and then you get the number 6.99. So the torpedo reaction time is essentially how much time they have to react to those torps once they become conscious of them, and that's excluding sonar situations, but just by the time they pop up on the screen naturally and how fast they're going. So interestingly enough, the Fletcher has the best reaction time of all the torpedo systems, and depending on how you want to evaluate your torpedo systems, I think a lot of players would put reaction time as the most important category, and it's hard to differ with that because those torpedoes are essentially the most dangerous if you can get them on target, and once they get close enough to the target, then it's very hard for the target to react. So I'm going to evaluate these ships at the end, kind of in a neutral manner. I'll explain how, but for you personally, you might say, well, reaction time's the most important to me, given this is what I'm trying to do with this ship. So here's a look at the 4 Tier 7s. Fletcher time, the numbers on the right are the upgraded torps, the numbers on the left, the unupgraded torps. So the Fletcher upgraded 6.99, Kagero 9.76, 8.01 on the Lightning, and Z23 8.16. Interestingly enough, the Z23 is one of those ships where the unupgraded torps actually has a better reaction time. And again, we're evaluating these torps from the destroyer's perspective, so having a longer reaction time like a Kagero is beneficial from the target's perspective, but for trying to kill the target, obviously you want the lowest reaction time as possible. So how you choose to evaluate torpedo systems across different destroyers is going to depend on what you want to do with the given ship. Like if you're purely into stealth torpedoing, well, having a really long range, having an effective range that is really long, good torpedo speed, those kind of factors are going to be more important to you. Like the Kagero leads in all of those, whereas you might say, well, the reaction time is the most important to me because I'm pretty confident in my ability to get the torps picked out in terms of where I should aim them. And then once those torpedoes get there, if they have very little time to react to them, then that makes those more deadly torps. And again, that's just going to depend on your own personal philosophy and how you want to think about it. And I should also point out, I'm trying to use the numbers of just the ships, not including commander builds, modules, stuff like that. I want to have a good method of comparing the ships by themselves without letting the build influence that, so keep that in mind. But there's different ways you can evaluate these torpedo systems now that you have the framework to do so. Again, you can value different numbers or different categories stronger than the other ones. An easy way to compare the ships for me is to just assign points for each category. So we have 6 categories: damage range, effective range, torp speed, torp detection, reaction time. And since we have 4 different nations of destroyers right now, evaluating these Tier 7 ships, I'm going to evaluate each category and then assign a point number. So damage, for instance, the Fletcher has 16,633. That's the second best, so I'm going to give it 3 of 4 points because it's the second best. Kagero would get 4 points because it's the best torpedo damage. Z23 would get 1 point because it has the worst torpedo damage. So looking at each category, if you're the worst, I'll give you 1 point, second worst 2 points, second best 3 points, best 4 points. And then I just went through each system and tallied up the numbers. So the Kagero came up with 17 points, and that's the highest out of these 4. Lightning 16 points, Fletcher 14 points, and Z23 12. So again, that is valuing each of the 6 categories equally, and it's just comparing them between the other ships in the class. So again, a very simplistic way to evaluate the torpedo system, but you can make the case, if that's how you want to do it, that okay, the Kagero seems to be the best at torping ships, the Lightning the second best, Fletcher the third, and the Z-23 the fourth. And if that's the framework you want to use, then you can say, okay, well, the Kagero is primarily a torpedo boat, Lightning a hybrid with a torpedo boat bent, Fletcher, you can make the case, I would call it a gunboat, but you could say it's a hybrid with a gunboat bent, and then you could straight up call the Z-23 a gunboat if that's what you wanted to do. And again, this is all personal, and I'm not gonna tell you how to evaluate these ships. That's just a basic way to do it, and I thought this would be interesting for you. I wanted to go over this information though, because a lot of people say, oh, the torp range is the longest, these must be the best torps, or the torp damage is the best, so these must be the best torps, you know. But reaction time, you can strongly make the case that's the most important. Effective range, I think, is a very important category for determining is this ship good at stealth torpedoing or not. And those two categories are not listed in the game. You kind of got to do some analysis on them yourself. And a lot of people kind of probably undervalued torpedo speed just because it's not as readily apparent to the destroyer player. Once those torps are launched, they're kind of just little triangles on your screen. Who knows what they're up to. So, and then torpedo detection, again, that's something that a lot of players probably don't consider when they're playing the game, because again, that affects things from the victim standpoint, not the perpetrator standpoint. So I hope you did enjoy this look at torpedoes and how to evaluate them. If you did like the video, please hit the thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, you should consider subscribing. I got a lot of World of Warships coming all the time for you. Questions, comments, leave them below. Love to hear from you guys, and we'll see y'all later. Alright, peace.